London, 1824. Isabel Fairmont knew she shouldn't be there. The Duke of Harrington's library was forbidden territory for a mere governess, but the door left ajar, the silence of the sleeping household, and her sleeplessness had led her there so late at night. Candlelight trembled in her hand as she ran her fingers along the leather spines. She was looking for an atlas for tomorrow's lesson. Nothing more. Nothing that could compromise her. The house was too silent. The servants had retired hours ago. The Duke slept upstairs. Lady Charlotte, her pupil, rested in the room next to her father's. Isabel knew everyone's schedules. She had to survive invisible in that world that wasn't hers. She knew the Duke tolerated no intruders in his library, and perhaps that was precisely why this night seemed the perfect moment to enter. Candlelight trembled in her hand as she ran her fingers along the leather spines, searching for the atlas of European geography she needed for Lady Charlotte's French lesson. That's when the papers fell. They were hidden behind a volume of poetry, loose yellowed sheets covered in symbols that danced in the unsteady light. Isabel recognized the structure immediately. Enciphered code, substitution pattern with rotational key. Her heart raced. Her hands moved of their own accord. Her father had taught her this at 12, between equations and laughter, before their world collapsed. Mathematics is language, my dear, and every language can be translated. She shouldn't. She knew that. But she grabbed a pen and a small blank piece of paper from the desk. 3 deciphered lines later, Isabel froze. This wasn't private correspondence. These were coordinates, names of French ports, shipping dates, espionage. The air grew thick. The candle sputtered. And then Isabel heard footsteps. Not in the corridor, closer, in the library itself. Panic was instant. Isabel extinguished 2 candles with her fingers, hid the papers under the atlas, and retreated into the shadows by the window, her heart exploding in her chest. She had been certain the library was empty when she entered. How could someone? The side door. The one leading to the garden. A silhouette emerged from the deeper shadows, near the back shelves. Tall, precise movements, like someone who knows every floorboard. He carried a small silver key in his hand, which he returned to his waistcoat pocket. He didn't light more candles. He simply walked straight to the poetry shelf, ran his hand behind the volumes, and stopped. Frowning, he searched again. Nothing. The papers weren't where they should be. Isabel felt her heart explode in her chest. She remained completely still, her back pressed against the cold wall, praying the shadows would hide her. The man turned, scanning the library with sharp eyes, and then saw them. The papers, on the desk. Under the atlas she'd tried to use as camouflage, he walked there with a predator's calm. The light from the single remaining candle illuminated his face. Perfectly disheveled golden hair. Impeccable silk cravat. Blue eyes she would recognize anywhere. Viscount Dominic Carstairs, the Duke's close friend. London's notorious charmer. The man who visited the house regularly for dinners and chess matches. But what was he doing here at midnight, entering through the garden door with his own key? He picked up the papers, examined them quickly, and froze. The first 3 lines were deciphered, with notes on a small piece of paper. His gaze cut through the darkness. "You may come out of the shadows." His voice came low, laden with danger. "I already know you're there." Silence answered first, thick as the darkness itself. "Come now, gentlemen," he continued, irony cutting through the air like a blade. "We needn't have a scandal at this hour." Isabel hesitated. There was no escape. She emerged slowly, lifting her chin, refusing to appear frightened. Dominic observed her. Dark hair half loose, simple dress, probably a maid. But those green eyes were defiant even in the face of danger. He raised the papers. "You deciphered this?" "Not a question." "Who are you, miss?" "Forgive me, my lord. They fell when I was looking for an atlas," Isabel replied, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "I'm curious by nature. A terrible flaw, they say." "Curious?" Dominic took a step toward her, tilting his head. "Is that what they call it these days?" The tone was light, mocking. But his eyes studied her like someone solving a problem. Isabel didn't retreat. If you plan to report me, your lordship, I suggest you be quick. She crossed her arms. I have a lesson at 8 and haven't slept enough yet. He blinked, and then laughed. A low sound, genuinely surprised. My God, he observed her as if seeing her for the first time. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? She asked, returning her attention to the papers on the desk. Most people are, he replied, advancing a step, his gaze fixed on her. Especially when they meddle in documents that don't concern them. He paused briefly, as if considering something, then added in a low tone, I shouldn't tell you this. Dominic began, his voice low, choosing each word carefully. But since you managed to decipher part of the message, it would be foolish to pretend it didn't happen. Isabel kept her gaze fixed on him, not moving. You know, he continued, with an almost imperceptible hesitation, that this library has more uses than it appears? Uses? She arched an eyebrow. Besides harboring dust and masculine vanity? The corner of his mouth threatened a smile, but his eyes didn't follow. Let's just say that some books hold more than words. A silence. The distant ticking of the clock in the next room seemed louder than it should. There are safe places in London, miss, he finally said. Few, but they exist. And some are safe precisely because no one suspects them. He removed the book from the shelf. The gesture was calm, almost distracted. Behind it, a small wooden compartment revealed itself for an instant. Too quick for her to see clearly, but enough to perceive that something was hidden there. Isabel felt her stomach contract. This is... she began, but he had already replaced the book. Nothing that should concern you. His voice sounded firm, but there was a shadow of weariness in it. Unless, of course, you're curious about what the government does with intercepted foreign messages. She paled. So that's what you do here? You spy? Spying is an ugly word. Dominic turned to her, and there was a new gleam in his eyes. I prefer to think that I collaborate. With whom? With those who need to know what the enemy plans before it's too late. He approached one step, then another. And the Duke of Harrington, fortunately, appreciates the game as much as I do. So the books are merely curtains, he interrupted, voice low. And some servants, merely pawns. She breathed in slowly. And you are what exactly? Dominic smiled, but this time the smile came tired, almost human. As I said, merely a collaborator helping as he can to fight for his country. Then he added without looking at her, and who, from time to time, needs to ensure that certain young ladies don't meddle where they're not called. But it was an accident. I shouldn't even be here. Isabel raised her chin. And when I saw these codes, my curiosity spoke louder. For an instant, he seemed about to respond, but didn't. He simply looked at her, and the distant sound of rain beginning to fall replaced any words he might say. When he finally spoke, the tone had changed. You deciphered 3 lines in less than 5 minutes. The irony had vanished. Who taught you? Isabel hesitated. Telling the truth was dangerous, but lying to someone who clearly understood codes would be worse. My father, she finally replied, keeping her tone neutral. And he was? Dominic asked, observing every micro-expression on her face. A mathematician. She looked away, pretending to organize the papers. Dead 5 years ago. With a name, I presume. He insisted, taking another step. Unless you prefer, I guess, as I believe I'll need to guess yours as well. Isabel took a deep breath. There was no escape. Thomas Fairmont, she said, raising her chin defiantly. Recognition was instant. Dominic stopped, his eyes widening for just a fraction of a second before narrowing again. The mathematician accused of fraud by the East India Company. He spoke slowly, like someone assembling a puzzle. Died before trial. Enormous scandal. His family lost everything. So you must be Isabel Fairmont. Very well informed for someone who spends his days choosing waistcoats. She replied coldly, though her hands trembled. And you... He tilted his head, studying her with new intensity. You believe he was innocent. It wasn't a question. I know he was. Isabel held his gaze. And I will still prove it. Silence. Dominic took a step forward, slowly, like someone approaching a wild animal. Then perhaps we have interests in common, Miss Fairmont. He stopped, capturing her gaze. I have access to archives you could never see, government documents, financial records, sealed correspondence. Isabel felt her heart race. And why the devil would you give me access to that? She asked, suspicious. Because I need someone with your talent, he replied simply. Work with me, miss. Decipher what I need. And in return, he raised the papers she had deciphered. I'll help you find who really destroyed your father. Isabel stared at him for a long moment. Every instinct screamed danger. But the chance was real. Then prove it to me, she finally said, crossing her arms. Prove you're not just another bored viscount seeking diversion at the expense of a desperate woman. Dominic tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with something that might be respect. Tomorrow night, he said. Not here, but at my house in Mayfair. I need a place where we can work without interruptions. Enter through the back door. Bring your sharp mind and nothing else. He paused. I'll show you 3 codes that my last cryptographer couldn't solve before dying of typhoid fever. If you can decipher at least one, you'll have proven your worth, and I'll give you access to the East India Company archives. Isabel held her breath. And if I can't? Then we'll both know this was just an unfortunate encounter in a forbidden library. He smiled slightly. And I'll keep your secret, just as I hope you'll keep mine. She studied his face, searching for lies, traps, danger. She found all those things, but she also found something more. Opportunity. I'll be there, she finally said. Excellent. Dominic walked to the desk, took the deciphered papers, and tucked them inside his coat. And Miss Fairmont? He stopped by the side door that led to the garden. Yes? Next time you decide to invade a library? He tilted his head slightly, a crooked smile appearing at the corner of his lips. Avoid snooping through documents. Some of them might put you in more danger than you imagine. And he left, leaving only the scent of leather and danger in the air. Isabel stood alone in the library, her heart still racing. She looked at the side door, now locked, and then at the volume of poetry on the shelf. Secret documents, espionage, the Duke involved. My God. And she had just agreed to work for a spy. She grabbed the atlas she'd come to find and walked back to her room, legs trembling. That night, Isabel didn't sleep. She just lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Isabel told Lady Harrington that her aunt was burning with fever in Cheapside. A necessary lie, sustained by a letter she herself had forged, deliberately trembling the handwriting to simulate urgency. The aunt, she explained, would send her own carriage should she need to fetch her late at night. Wrapped in a dark wool shawl that covered her hair and part of her face, Isabel walked quickly through the 2 streets separating her from the Harrington mansion. The carriage waiting for her bore no coat of arms. Black, anonymous, dissolving into the darkness like ink on velvet. The coachman didn't speak. He merely opened the door and waited, his face hidden beneath the wide-brimmed hat. Isabel entered without hesitation. 20 minutes later, the carriage stopped on a silent street in Mayfair. No lights in the windows, no witnesses. She descended, found the back door, knocked twice. Dominic opened immediately, as if he'd been waiting on the other side. Without his coat, only shirt and waistcoat. He looked different without his social armor. Younger, more tired, more real. Punctual. He commented quietly, quickly closing the door behind her. And discreet. A good combination. He led her down a narrow corridor to the library. Smaller than expected. There was no empty opulence, just filled shelves, maps on the walls, codes scattered across the mahogany desk. It smelled of ink, old paper, and guarded secrets. I didn't come for conversation, Isabel said, looking around. Where are the codes? He pointed to the desk. 3 sets of yellowed papers, covered in symbols incomprehensible to common eyes. Isabel approached, her fingers already moving on their own over the enciphered lines. Before that, Dominic interrupted, placing his hand over the papers. I need to know if you're prepared for what this means. She raised her eyes. I'm here, aren't I? Being here and understanding the consequences are different things. He held her gaze. If you work with me, Miss Fairmont, there will be no turning back. You'll see things the government prefers to hide. You'll know names you shouldn't know. You'll carry secrets that can destroy entire families. He paused. Including mine. Isabel hesitated. For the first time since entering, fear touched her. Mathematics is language, my dear. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. But remember, every translation has a price. He knew. Her father always knew that deciphering secrets was dangerous, and died because of it. I understand the risks, she finally said, her voice firm. Are you certain? Dominic insisted. Because once you know what's in those archives about your father, you cannot unknow it. And truth, Miss Fairmont, doesn't always liberate. Sometimes it only hurts. She held his gaze. I prefer a truth that hurts to a comfortable lie. Silence. Dominic nodded slowly, removing his hand from the papers. Then we have an agreement. You decipher what I need. I give you access to the East India Company records. Everything there is about Thomas Fairmont. He extended his hand. Isabel looked at it. Firm, without gloves, an invitation and a trap at the same time. And if I discover something you'd prefer remained buried? She asked. His smile was sad. Then we'll discover together if I'm as brave as I pretend to be. She took his hand. The grip was brief, formal, but something passed between them. A silent promise, a shared danger. Welcome to the game, Miss Fairmont, he said, releasing her. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. And about Lady Harrington. The Duke has already taken care of it. Isabel frowned. What do you mean? I informed him about you yesterday. Your talent, your discretion, your situation, Dominic explained. He spoke with Lady Harrington this morning. Suggested that you would need occasional flexibility to handle family matters. He paused deliberately. Lady Harrington will not question your absences. The Duke has guaranteed it. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine. So he knows about all of this. He knows you're valuable, Dominic corrected, and that your work serves the Crown's interests. That's sufficient. It didn't sound reassuring. It sounded like being in someone powerful's crosshairs. You should thank me, he added with a half smile. Now you can come and go without inventing dying ants. Or I should be afraid, Isabel replied. Because now I'm being watched by a duke. His smile disappeared. Yes, you should. Tense silence. The carriage will take you back before dawn, Dominic said, changing the subject. Same time, 3 nights from now? Isabel picked up the first code, her eyes already deciphering patterns. I'll be here. But they both knew. It was too late to turn back. The third night was different. The light rain against the windows seemed to mark time, like an invisible metronome. The fireplace flame oscillated in copper tones, reflecting in the glass bottles and the gleam of Dominic's eyes. Isabel deciphered the first code in 20 minutes, the second in 15. The sound of the pen on paper filled the room like held breath. When she raised her eyes, Dominic was watching, expression immobile, almost indecipherable. What is it? She asked, setting down the pen. Nothing. He looked away, pouring wine, the crystal clinking softly. Just, William used to take days to do what you do in minutes. William was your previous cryptographer? He was my friend. He corrected, his voice lower. We grew up together. When the fever took him, I thought I'd never find someone with half his talent. He paused. You have twice it. Isabel felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't pride. It was something more dangerous, a spark of connection that shouldn't exist. My father used to say I had a facility with patterns, she murmured, returning to the code. That I saw structures where others saw chaos. Your father was right. The silence that followed was soft, almost comfortable, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the rhythmic sound of the pen. The warmth of the fire mixed with the aroma of wine, paper, and ink. an atmosphere of secrecy and temptation. "May I ask something?" Isabel said without raising her eyes. "Depends on the question." "Why do you do this?" She looked at him. "Espionage. Risk. You're a viscount. You could live off balls and hunts. You don't need this." Dominic smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps that's exactly why. Because I don't need to." He poured himself wine and watched the ruby liquid swirl in the glass. "My father raised me to be useless, an ornament, a name at dinners and invitations. When the Duke offered me this work, it was the first time anyone asked me to be useful." The raw sincerity of those words surprised her. "And the mask?" Isabel asked, almost in a whisper. "London's frivolous seducer? Let's say it's protection." He replied simply, "No one suspects a man who appears to think only of the next ball." She almost smiled. "Very clever. Lonely," he corrected. Their eyes met. There was a silent recognition there. Two people exiled under different masks, both paying the price for being who they are. Isabel returned to the code, but noticed her hands trembling slightly. "This one is more complex," she said, pointing to a sequence. "See, the key changes every 7 characters, not every 5 like before." Dominic leaned over the desk, the firelight reflecting on the contours of his face. Their hands touched over the parchment. The world seemed to stop. Just 1 second, enough for the touch to transform into embers. Isabel pulled away first, her heart racing. "Forgive me, No." Dominic interrupted, his voice hoarse. "Don't apologize." The silence that came after was different from all the previous ones. Dense, electric, charged with words neither dared pronounce. She forced herself to resume the code, but the letters scrambled under the pen. Dominic remained where he was, too close. The sound of his breathing mixed with the crackling of the fire. "I should finish this," she said without raising her gaze. "You should," he replied, but didn't move. Finally, Dominic retreated, walking to the window. The firelight sketched his silhouette in tones of gold and shadow. Isabel finished the last code in silence, trying to ignore the tremor in her hands. When she stood, he was still facing away. "The carriage," she began, "is waiting," he completed, without turning. "Same time, 3 nights from now?" She nodded, even knowing he couldn't see. "I'll be here." At the door, she stopped, turned. "Dominic?" He turned, his face divided between light and shadow. "Yes, you're not useless." And she left before he could respond, before the moment became something neither was ready to face. Dominic stood alone in the library. The fire crackled low, and the silence seemed alive. He looked at his own hand, still warm from her touch. Isabel shouldn't have been there. In fact, she didn't want to be there. But Lady Harrington had insisted she needed a companion. "I need someone discreet nearby, and you know how to conduct yourself." And now she sat far from everyone, invisible in her simple governess dress, watching London's elite dance, and watching Dominic Carstairs seduce half of society. He was dazzling. Impeccable navy blue coat, white silk cravat, that lazy smile that made debutantes blush. He was dancing with Lady Caroline Pemberton, whispering something that made her laugh, touching her waist with studied familiarity. The perfect mask. Isabel looked away, feeling something unpleasant twist in her stomach. Ridiculous. He's nothing to you. But then their eyes met across the ballroom. Just 1 second, perhaps less. But it was enough for the world to disappear. How had he discovered her? She was invisible, wasn't she? No one had spoken to her even once yet. Dominic missed a step in the waltz. Lady Caroline frowned, confused. He murmured an apology, recovered the rhythm, but something changed in his expression. The music ended. Then he bowed, kissed the hand of Lady Caroline, with whom he'd been dancing, and disappeared toward the terrace. Isabel remained there, feeling her chest tighten with something she couldn't name. "It's none of your business. He can dance with whomever he wishes," said a persistent feminine voice in her head. But logic didn't calm what she felt. Then another scene cut through her thoughts. A woman was also heading toward the terrace. Beautiful, blonde, her emerald green silk dress shimmering under the candlelight. A magnificent piece, flowing behind her as if it had life of its own. It was Lady Victoria Lennox. Isabel had already heard the name whispered more than once in Lady Harrington's drawing rooms, always accompanied by the same title that seemed inevitable: the future Viscountess Carstairs. Victoria disappeared in the direction of the glass doors, following Dominic. Isabel should find something to drink and feign indifference. She should check if Lady Harrington needed anything, smile politely. She should. But her feet were already moving on their own. The corridor leading to the terrace was almost empty, except for some ornamental palms and tall vases, casting long shadows under the yellow light. The air there was colder, and the distant sound of the string quartet mixed with the rustling of curtains. Isabel stopped before the half-open doors and remained motionless. On the other side, the terrace extended in pale stone, illuminated only by the moon and some iron lanterns attached to the columns. There were pots with ivy and climbing roses, and the night wind made the flames tremble. A corner of wisteria formed a small shadowy alcove, and it was there that Isabel hid, half between the flowers and the shadow cast by the pillar. From where she stood, she could see without being seen. Victoria was too close to Dominic. The light touch of her hand on his arm had a rehearsed intimacy, as if it already belonged to him. "You've been avoiding me." Her voice was soft, accusatory. "It's been weeks since we dined together." "I've been occupied," Dominic replied, polite but distant. "Occupied?" Victoria repeated, skeptical. "With what? You do nothing but attend balls and clubs." "Exactly." He smiled, but the smile didn't pass his lips. It was that same trained, empty smile he used for the world. "And it's exhausting." "Dominic?" Victoria raised her hand, holding his face with forced delicacy, as if wanting to bring him back from some distant place. "When will you stop pretending?" For an instant, the mask yielded. His expression wavered, and Isabel saw, even from where she stood, the weariness that infiltrated the lines of his face, the loneliness that neither charm nor title could hide. But the moment dissolved in the blink of an eye. "I don't know what you're talking about." His voice returned to the light, rehearsed tone, as if her words had slid across a surface too smooth to leave a mark. Victoria sighed, releasing him with a gesture of surrender. "One day you'll realize you don't need to be alone," she said with a sad sweetness. "And I hope to be around when that happens." She turned to leave. The green silk of her dress brushed the flowers on the parapet as she passed, and for a brief second, the scent of jasmine mixed with the cold night air. She passed so close to Isabel that one wrong movement would have betrayed her presence. Isabel remained motionless, her heart hammering in her chest. When the sound of footsteps faded, Dominic remained where he was, with his back turned, hands resting on the stone balustrade, gaze lost in the darkness of the gardens. The wind stirred his hair, and the moon made the rings on his fingers shimmer. She should leave, pretend she'd never been there. But the silence between them was too dense, and something in the way he breathed kept her rooted to the ground. "You may come out of the shadows, Miss Fairmont." His voice cut through the air, low but certain. "I know you're there." Isabel held her breath. Then she took a step forward, emerging from the shadow of the wisteria. I didn't intend to spy?" He turned, and the eyes that found her weren't those of the insolent viscount from the ballroom. There was vulnerability there, something that didn't fit with the man everyone thought they knew. "It seems to be a talent of yours." "I came for air," she replied too quickly. "Lady Victoria arrived first, and you stayed." She couldn't finish. The silence that followed seemed to echo. Dominic observed her for a long time, his gaze firm, inquisitive. "What you saw in the ballroom," he began, then stopped, as if the words weighed more than intended. "The dances, the smiles, it's part of what I do, what I need to be." "I know," Isabel replied, her voice more brusque than she'd like. "Do you?" He took a step toward her. The distance between them diminished until she could feel the warmth of his body contrasting with the cold air. Because it seemed what? He hesitated, his eyes lowering to her mouth before looking away. Bothered. He finally said, "I wasn't." She lied. "No? No." She raised her chin, her heart racing. "What you do, whom you dance with, is none of my concern." "No, it isn't." He agreed, but neither of them moved. The silence pulsed between them, so alive it seemed to have form. The distant music from the ballroom floated through the air, a drawn-out violin, the soft echo of laughter, and sounded like it came from another world. "I should return," Isabel said, trying to break the spell. "You should," he repeated, without moving. The tension between them was almost physical, an invisible line stretched to its limit. Then, voices sounded in the distance. Both retreated, the spell broken in an instant. Lady Harrington appeared at the door, her severe face illuminated by the light from the ballroom. "Miss Fairmont?" "Ah," Viscount Carstairs. Her eyes passed from one to the other, assessing the charged air between them. "What a curious coincidence. Merely seeking fresh air, Lady Harrington." Dominic replied with that polished charm Isabel now recognized as a shield. "Your governess is, it seems, exceptionally dedicated." "Yes," Lady Harrington retorted dryly. "Very dedicated." "Good evening, ladies." Dominic inclined his head and passed them, his woody perfume still lingering in the air. But before disappearing, his eyes met Isabel's one last time, a quick instant, but enough for her to perceive. He was as confused as she was. "Let us go," Lady Harrington said, her tone cold enough to freeze any emotion. "It's late." On the way back, Isabel maintained a serene face, but her chest vibrated in disorder. What she'd felt on the terrace, that invisible touch, that confusion, wasn't something that could be explained or forgotten. And Dominic, alone in his library hours later, still stared into emptiness, asking himself the same thing she did. At what moment exactly had the game stopped being just a game? Chapter 5. The Forbidden Archive. 5 nights after the ball, the moon still hung pale over London when Dominic finally fulfilled what he had promised. The library was plunged in silence, except for the crackling of the fireplace. "I've obtained access to the archives," he said, pushing a dark leather folder across the mahogany desk. The golden seal of the East India Company gleamed in the firelight. "Everything I could get. 1819 to 1821. Isabel looked at the folder like someone facing a trap carefully disguised as a gift. "How?" Her voice barely escaped. "The Duke has his ways," Dominic replied evasively. "But I need to return them before dawn. That gives you 3 hours, perhaps 4, if the city sleeps later than usual tonight." He leaned back, observing her. The tension in his face was discreet but real. Isabel, however, barely heard him. Her fingertips traced the folder's leather, hesitant, as if opening that clasp might release ghosts. Then she took a deep breath and opened it. The smell of old paper and dried ink hit her immediately. Years of searching, of unanswered questions, of nights trying to decipher what fate had denied her. And finally, there they were, the answers. Or perhaps, the end. "I'll fetch more tea," Dominic said, heading for the door. His voice sounded distant, almost gentle. "And leave you in peace. I know this is personal." She nodded, but the gesture was automatic. Her eyes were already devouring the pages. Transaction records, shipments, remittances from India, Ceylon, Calcutta. Names of powerful men and exorbitant amounts. The cold language of finance, figures that hid human miseries. Meanwhile, her father's name appeared in reports laden with accusations. Misappropriation of funds, record manipulation, proven fraud. Isabel's throat tightened. She turned another page, and then the world seemed to stop. Case number 847, Thomas Fairmont, charge of fund misappropriation. Her hands trembled so much the paper nearly escaped. She read line by line, the letters swimming before her eyes. Each accusation sounded too false, too rehearsed. And at the end came the signatures. Henry Carstairs, Earl of Harrington. Audit Supervisor, East India Company. For an instant, Isabel forgot how to breathe. No, it couldn't be. Her pupils dilated, pages flew between her fingers. She searched for another date, another name, any error that would disprove what she saw. But there was no mistake. Among the audit notes, a paragraph in firm handwriting made her freeze. Investigation of Mr. Fairmont is recommended, whose involvement appears consistent with the detected misappropriations. It is advisable to temporarily remove him from his duties until the inquiry concludes. Isabel recognized the pattern, the exact structure of a manipulated report. There wasn't proof here. There was a sentence carefully disguised as caution. It was the trail of a man transferring guilt line by line, erasing his own name while destroying another's. Diverted transactions, authorized by Henry Carstairs. Falsified records, signed by Henry Carstairs. Guilt transferred to Thomas Fairmont. Direct recommendation from Henry Carstairs. Dominic's father. The father of the man she was beginning to love. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. The fireplace flames flickered, and for an instant she thought it was her own body wavering. Her mind screamed that something was wrong, but the paper, cold and merciless, said otherwise. She turned more pages. Tears already blurred the letters. Each line was a blade. Each signature, a sentence. Henry Carstairs had stolen thousands of pounds from the company, and when the net closed, he'd chosen a convenient culprit. An honest mathematician, without power, without defense. Her father. The pain came like a dull wave, rising without warning. The sound of the door opening tore her from her trance. Dominic entered, balancing a silver tray with coffee and 2 steaming cups. The contrast between the banality of the gesture and the weight of the revelation was cruel. "Did you find something?" he asked, approaching. Isabel blinked, trying to adjust her face. In a quick movement, she closed the folder, hiding the folded page among the others. "No," she said, surprising herself with the calm of her own voice. "Not yet. I need more time." Dominic frowned, attentive. "Are you certain? You're pale." "Just tired." She forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "And disappointed. I thought I'd find clear answers, but there's nothing here my father didn't already know." The words came out smooth, but inside her, they burned. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her father probably knew of the betrayal and died in silence, perhaps to protect her. "I'm sorry," Dominic said, and there was something genuine, almost tender, in his voice. "I know how much this meant to you." Isabel nodded, not trusting her own voice. Her throat was too tight. He took the folder, adjusting the leather clasp carefully. "I need to return this to the Duke before dawn," he explained. "But I can try to obtain access again if you want to review it more carefully." "No?" She interrupted too quickly, the sound cutting the air like a blade. "No need. Everything is fine. Lie. Nothing was fine. I'm feeling a bit tired. Thank you, but the coffee can wait for another night. I need to retire a bit earlier today." Dominic hesitated for an instant, then simply nodded, respecting her decision. "The carriage is waiting," he said softly. "See you in 3 nights?" Isabel nodded without raising her gaze. She was afraid he might see the truth written in her eyes. And no. On the way back, wrapped in her shawl, London's silent streets passed blurred before her. And when she finally allowed herself to breathe, the tears came, silent, stubborn, mixing with the dawn's cold. Because now she knew the truth, and she had no idea what to do with it. Isabel didn't return. The carriage came, waited, and departed empty. In the library, Dominic stood alone with the note between his fingers. Thin paper, delicate handwriting, message too brief for what it meant. "I can no longer do this." He read the words more than once, but the meaning didn't change. Something was wrong. Isabel, for her part, had spent nights awake. She'd tried to convince herself she'd done the right thing. but every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. The way he tilted his head when he watched her decipher a code. The low voice, laden with irony and something more dangerous, tenderness disguised. And above all, the memory of that night at the ball. Dominic among the golden lights, the evening wear perfectly aligned, the easy smile that enchanted everyone. So beautiful, so at ease in the role of a man the world admired, and yet so distant from himself. It was unfair that a man capable of destroying her peace with a look should also be the son of the man who destroyed her father's life. It took him 2 days to find her. The afternoon sun fell obliquely over the small garden behind the Harrington mansion, filtered through trellises covered with ivy. The air smelled of earth and crushed leaves. Isabel sat on a stone bench, supervising Charlotte's botany lessons. The girl spoke about petals and roots, but Isabel seemed far away, her gaze fixed on nothing. When she saw Dominic crossing the lawn, her body stiffened. The blood fled from her face. "Viscount," she said with formal coldness, as if they were two polite strangers. "Miss Fairmont." He inclined his head, his voice contained, tense. "Could you grant me a moment? It's urgent." Charlotte looked from one to the other, curious, feeling the change in the air. Isabel dismissed her with a fragile smile and waited until the girl disappeared behind the rose bushes. The silence that settled afterward was almost physical. "Why did you stop coming?" Dominic asked directly, his tone graver than intended. "I realized it was imprudent to continue." "Imprudent?" he repeated, not believing. "After weeks working together, suddenly it's imprudent." Isabel didn't respond. Her hands, crossed before her body, trembled slightly. "What happened?" he insisted. "Was it something in the archives? You said you found nothing, but—" "I lied." The words came quickly, like a confession that burned her throat. "I found everything." Dominic stopped. The wind seemed to cease. "What?" "Your father." Her voice failed but continued. "Henry Carstairs. He did everything, diverted the money, falsified the records, and placed the blame on my father." The color drained from his face. "No," he whispered, incredulous. "And I saw the signatures." She raised her chin, tears already escaping. "On every document, on every fraudulent transaction, on every accusation against Thomas Fairmont." Her voice broke. "Your father destroyed my family, killed my father, and I—" She took a deep breath, trying to contain her crying. "I was working with his son, trusting you, feeling—" She stopped, biting her lip, unable to finish. Dominic looked as if he'd been struck. "Isabel, I didn't know. I swear by everything sacred." "I know," she interrupted, wiping tears angrily. "That's why it hurts so much." The silence fell between them again, heavy, suffocating. The garden seemed to contract around them. "Let me investigate," Dominic pleaded, his voice hoarse. "Let me obtain the archives again. Confirm, understand why." "You don't need to confirm," Isabel said firmly, controlled, but her eyes betrayed the pain. "I saw. I memorized every detail, every date, every signature. It's real." "Then let me discover the reason." He took a step forward. "Why my father did what he did. There must be a reason, a context. And does that change anything?" Isabel asked, desperate. "Your father ruined mine. The reason doesn't matter. It matters to me." Dominic held her gaze. "Because if I'm going to seek justice, I need to understand everything." She laughed, a sound without joy. "Justice? You'd lose everything, Dominic. Your name, your position, everything you have." "Then I'll lose it," he said simply. And this time there was no hesitation, no bravado, only truth. "If I have to lose everything to clear your father's name, perhaps that should be the price I must pay." Isabel shook her head, tears flowing freely. "I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking," he replied. "I'm offering." Voices echoed from the house, Lady Harrington calling Isabel's name impatiently. "I must go," she murmured, drying her face with the back of her hand. "Isabel, please." No, she raised her hand, firm. No, please don't make this harder than it already is. Then she turned and walked toward the house, her dress dragging over the garden gravel. Dominic remained there, immobile, watching her disappear among the ivy columns. The garden became just a garden again, but the air seemed different, dense, impregnated with something he couldn't name. The flowers exuded too much perfume, the wind seemed colder, and everything around carried her absence. He remained for a long time, looking at the emptiness, the sound of her last words still echoing. But it wasn't just that. It was also the sound of his own breathing, irregular, and the memory of her gaze, wounded, but still full of something that would haunt him. Perhaps it was regret, perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was something simpler and infinitely more dangerous. Dominic didn't want to admit it, not even to himself. But there was something in Isabelle Fairmont that had disarmed him from the beginning. And now, even between the weight of shame and the horror of truth, all he could think about was her. Dominic spent the first 2 days hating himself for not noticing. That night, when he'd brought the archives, he'd given Isabelle complete privacy. It was about her father, after all, and he had no right to watch while she relived such ancient pain. While she read, he'd gone to prepare tea. In that secret house, without servants for security reasons, he had to do everything himself. A bitter irony, a viscount boiling water, while secrets were unearthed in the next room. When she'd said she found nothing definitive, he'd believed her. Why wouldn't he? Isabelle had never lied to him before. Afterward, he'd returned the archives to the Duke immediately, before dawn, as promised, without reviewing, without checking anything, because never, not for a single second, had he suspected his own father. Henry Carstairs was many things, cold, distant, inflexible, but corrupt, criminal? The idea had never crossed his mind, until Isabelle threw the truth in his face. Now, 2 days later, he crossed London determined to discover if the entire world he knew had been a lie. The Duke's house clock marked nearly 8 o'clock when he was received. The Duke, still with dinner recent, lit a cigar and led him to the study. The air was dense with smoke and authority. "Carstairs," the Duke said in a grave tone, releasing a smoke ring. "I hope this is urgent?" "It is, Your Grace." Dominic replied, his voice low, firm. "I discovered that my father, Henry Carstairs, was the one who incriminated Thomas Fairmont." He took a deep breath. "Actually, it was Isabelle." He hesitated, correcting himself. "Miss Fairmont who found the proof. He committed the fraud, deliberately ruined Thomas Fairmont." The Duke arched an eyebrow, then turned to the bookshelf. He rotated a small golden latch and opened a secret compartment, removing an aged leather folder from within. The candle flame flickered, casting shadows across the walls covered with books and maps. He examined the papers in silence for long seconds, his face impassive. Then he put on his spectacles and brought one of the sheets close to the light. "Carstairs," he murmured. "When exactly did Miss Fairmont see these documents?" "5 nights ago," Dominic replied, tense. "When I gave her access to the archives." "And you reviewed them afterward?" "No. She said she'd found nothing, and I believed her. I returned the archives to you at dawn." "And when did you discover otherwise?" "2 days ago," Dominic answered. "In the garden. She told me everything." The Duke frowned. "Then look here." He pointed to a signature. "See the inclination of the H and the pen pressure on the C. Is it consistent?" Dominic leaned over the desk. "I never noticed. I can't say." The Duke straightened, crossed the study, and unlocked a dark wood cabinet. He removed another folder, more recent, and placed it alongside. "For 2 months, I've been noticing inconsistencies in official correspondence," he said, leafing through carefully. "Ministry documents with signatures that seemed wrong." He placed a recent letter next to the 1819 archive. "Look, same falsification pattern." Dominic felt his blood run cold. "Are you saying that someone forged the signatures?" The Duke's voice was controlled, but his eyes betrayed unease. both the old and the current ones, which means your father may have been a victim, not the culprit. The silence that followed was absolute. Dominic breathed deeply, trying to contain the torrent of thoughts. "You're telling me they falsified my father's signature?" he asked, bringing the paper closer to the light. "But who would do this, and why?" "Someone within the system," the Duke replied. "Someone who knows the protocols, the seals, the flow of archives." He leafed through one more page and suddenly stopped. His face paled. "What is it?" Dominic asked. "Graves," the Duke said, his voice low. "Sir Edmund Graves, my undersecretary. He was the one who organized these archives before delivering them to you." He paused. "And he worked at the East India Company in 1819. The two looked at each other, and for the first time, the Duke appeared truly disturbed. The fragments were finally beginning to fit together. "We need proof," Dominic said. "Real proof, not just suspicions. We have something better." The Duke leaned back, his gaze cold and calculating. "We have Miss Fairmont. If anyone can identify patterns in falsifications, it's her." Dominic nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "I'll speak with her." "No?" The Duke stopped him with a gesture. "We will speak with her, tomorrow, officially." The tone was now one of hunting. "And we're going to catch that bastard." The next morning, the sun had barely risen when Dominic crossed the gates of the Harrington mansion. Isabel's words still echoed in his mind, along with the memory of her eyes, wounded, distrustful, and yet impossible to forget. But this time, he wasn't coming seeking forgiveness, nor excuses. He came for another reason. He had something that changed everything, and he needed Isabel, not to confront her, but to save them, all of them. Isabel was in the garden when she saw him arrive. She stopped, her hands still holding Charlotte's book, her heart racing. Dominic crossed the lawn with rapid steps, the wind stirring his dark coat. But when he got close, he stopped, respecting the distance between them. "I need to speak with you," he said. "And with the Duke of Harrington. Now." She frowned. "Dominic, I already told you that. Your father may have been innocent." He interrupted her. "And so was mine." The world seemed to stop. "What?" "The signatures. They were forged. All of them." The words came quickly, urgent. The Duke discovered the same falsification pattern in recent documents. "Someone has been manipulating archives for years, and we believe we know who." Isabel felt her legs weaken. How can you be certain?" "I can't. Not yet." Dominic took a step forward. "But you can. Your talent with patterns, with codes. It's more than numbers. You see what others don't. If anyone can prove the signatures are false, it's you." She looked at him. His blue eyes reflected something between hope and desperation. "Show me," she finally said. An hour later, they were in the Duke of Harrington's study. The room was vast, lined with books, with tall windows that let the gray morning light filter through heavy curtains. Papers and folders were spread across the mahogany desk. Isabel, Dominic, and the two dukes, Harrington and Dominic's mentor, were gathered. Isabel took a deep breath before beginning. She picked up the first signature, then the second. Her eyes moved with almost mathematical precision, measuring angles, calculating pressures, observing small imperfections, or their absence. "Here," she pointed with the pen. "The inclination of the sea is always identical, exactly 47 degrees. In all signatures attributed to Henry Carstairs." "And that's abnormal?" asked the Duke of Harrington, observing over his spectacles. "Impossible," Isabel replied. "No one signs twice in an absolutely identical manner. The human hand always varies. A lighter stroke, another deeper, the curve changes." She touched another sheet. "But these are too perfect. The same stroke, the same pressure, as if they'd been traced with a template." "A template?" the Duke repeated. "Or a copying instrument," Isabel explained. "There are those who use rulers and overlapping tracings to duplicate handwriting. All it takes is practice and patience." Dominic's mentor Duke exchanged a look with Dominic. "Graves," he said, his voice low. "Sir Edmund Graves has that patience. Isabel examined more documents. She picked up a magnifying glass and leaned over the paper. "Observe here." She pointed. "The pen cut leaves a microscopic split, and this split repeats in the forgeries. It's a sign of a double-pointed metal pen, the type used by professional scribes. Your father, Viscount, used quill pens. The cut would be different." Dominic leaned in, astonished. Are you certain of this?" "I am," she replied firmly. "And more, the ink used in these copies is different. See the shine, more recent, darker. Someone rewrote these signatures with another formula." The Duke of Harrington crossed his arms, thoughtful. "And the recent signatures?" Dominic pushed another set of papers forward. "These arrived at the ministry a few weeks ago." Isabel compared them. Her gaze moved from side to side, quick, concentrated. "Same pattern," she finally said. "Same inclination, same pressure, same metal pen. Whoever forged the old ones forged these as well." The mentor Duke spat the name like poison. "Graves. Sir Edmund Graves." But Isabel shook her head. "We need more. We need something that links these falsifications to his real handwriting. Correspondence, an authentic signature." "He works at the ministry," Dominic replied. "He signs documents daily." "Exactly," said Isabel, turning to the Duke. "Your Grace has access to those records?" The Duke smiled, a cold and satisfied gesture. "I do, and I'll fetch them now." 2 hours later, the truth lay before them. Sir Edmund Graves's authentic signatures, removed from ministry archives, showed the handwriting of a real man, irregular, alive, with small flaws and human hesitations. The forged ones, in contrast, exhibited the same perfect stroke, the same identical pressure, the same metal pen. Isabel pointed out the differences with precision. "It's him," she said, her voice trembling. "Sir Edmund Graves destroyed my father, and tried to destroy yours as well." Dominic remained silent for an instant. Then, slowly, he held her hand on the table. For the first time in days, Isabel didn't pull away. "Now we'll catch him," he said. "How?" Isabel asked. The Duke stood, extinguishing his cigar in the silver ashtray. His gaze was steel. "With a trap," he said coldly. "And you two will be the bait." The trap was simple, dangerous, but simple. The Duke let slip in casual conversation with Graves that there were inconsistencies in the old East India Company archives, that perhaps he needed to review everything, reopen cases, and then they waited. 3 nights later, Graves invaded the Duke's library. Isabel and Dominic were hidden behind the shelves, in the dark. The Duke and 2 ministry officers waited in the corridor. They watched Graves enter through the same garden door Dominic used. He had a key. Of course he did. He was the undersecretary. He had access to everything. He went straight to the secret compartment behind the books. His hands trembled as he searched for the archives. "Where is it?" he murmured to himself. "Where did he hide, looking for this?" The Duke's voice came from the doorway. The lights came on. Graves froze, a document in his hand. "Your Grace, I was merely invading my house at midnight?" The Duke entered, followed by the officers. "Looking for something specific, Graves?" "I can explain. Can you?" Dominic emerged from the shadows. "Then explain this." He threw dozens of sheets onto the table. Handwriting comparisons, pattern analyses, irrefutable proof. Graves paled. "This doesn't prove anything. It proves everything." Isabel also emerged, firm. "Every falsification has its marks, the pen pressure, the angle, the hesitation in certain letters. You left your signature in every lie." "And in 1819? Dominic took a step forward. "When you forged documents incriminating Thomas Fairmont? When you used my father's name to hide your crimes?" "I didn't." Thomas Fairmont was discovering the embezzlement. The Duke said coldly. "You eliminated him before he could report it. And you used Henry Carstairs as a scapegoat because he was the perfect supervisor, powerful enough to be credible, dead enough not to defend himself." Graves stumbled, supporting himself on the table. "It was an accident. He shouldn't..." Shouldn't have investigated. I needed the money. I had debts, and afterward it became too big to stop. So you continued, Isabel said, her voice cutting. For years, how many others did you destroy? Silence. The officers approached. Sir Edmund Graves, one of them said. You are under arrest for fraud, falsification of official documents, and unlawful incrimination. Graves didn't resist. He merely lowered his head as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. As they led him away, he stopped before Isabel. Your father. He was too good, too honest. He said quietly. In a world like this, that's dangerous. No, Isabel replied. Men like you are dangerous. My father was merely courageous, and Graves was taken into the night. Isabel felt her legs weaken. Dominic caught her before she fell. It's over, he whispered. Finally over. My father? She looked at him, tears falling. He was innocent. He always was. Dominic wiped her tears with his thumb. And the world will know. The Duke approached. I'll convene a public hearing at the ministry. 2 days from now, the names of Thomas Fairmont and Henry Carstairs will be officially cleared. Isabel nodded, unable to speak. Dominic held her closer, and for the first time in weeks, she let him. 3 weeks later, everything was resolved. Graves had been tried and convicted. The names of Thomas Fairmont and Henry Carstairs officially cleared. The ministry had published a public notice restoring both reputations. London had been talking about the scandal for days. With the Fairmont name restored, Isabel's life had changed. Lady Harrington, though cordial after the public exoneration, had made it clear that, given the extraordinary circumstances, it would be better if Isabel sought new horizons. The unspoken truth, a governess involved in public scandals, even as a victim, was not well regarded. But for the first time, Isabel had a choice. Her paternal aunt, Margaret Fairmont, Thomas's sister, had appeared 3 days after the trial. A widow, living modestly in Bloomsbury, she'd offered home and companionship. Your father was my favorite brother, the woman with graying hair and kind eyes had said. I should have sought you out years ago. But I was ashamed. I believed the lies. Forgive me. Isabel had embraced her, crying. And now she lived there. In a small cottage with a garden, stacked books, and the smell of fresh bread her aunt insisted on making every morning. It was simple, but it was home. The knock on the door came on a sunny afternoon. Aunt Margaret answered and returned with a surprised expression. Isabel? There's a viscount at the door, asking permission to visit you. Her heart raced. Viscount Carstairs? The very same. Her aunt arched an eyebrow. Should I let him in or send him away? Isabel smoothed her dress, her face warming. Let him in, Aunt Margaret smiled. I'll prepare tea, and I'll stay in the kitchen, but I'll leave the door ajar. Dominic entered the small parlor, hat in his hands, nervous in a way Isabel had never seen. Miss Fairmont, he said formally. Thank you for receiving me, Viscount, she replied, trying not to smile. To what do I owe the honor? He took a deep breath. I came to ask your aunt's permission to court you, officially, properly. Isabel felt her heart race. And she agreed? She said it depended on you. He took a step forward. So, do you agree? She finally smiled. Sit down, Dominic. You look about to faint. He laughed, sitting beside her on the small sofa. I spent weeks working with you in secret. He confessed. We faced lies, danger, pain. And now I need to ask permission to take tea with you. That's how it works, Isabel said. But her hand found his between them. He intertwined his fingers with hers. Then I'll do it right, he said quietly. There will be flowers, walks in the park, visits with your aunt present. Everything you deserved from the beginning, Dominic. But you need to know. He held her face with his free hand. I'm not here out of obligation, not because our fathers were exonerated. I'm here because I spent weeks trying not to fall in love with you. And I failed. Completely. Isabel felt tears burn. When was it? She whispered. When did you realize? The third night, when our hands touched over that parchment. He smiled. And you? In the garden, When you said you'd discover the truth even thinking your father was guilty. She touched his face. That's when I knew. From the kitchen, they heard the deliberate scraping of Aunt Margaret's chair, a gentle reminder they weren't alone. Dominic retreated, laughing quietly. Your aunt is vigilant. She approves of you, Isabel said. Or she wouldn't have let you in. Then may I return tomorrow? And the day after? She agreed. And the day after that. He held her hand, bringing it to his lips in a respectful kiss. I will court you properly, Isabel Fairmont. He promised. And when I ask for your hand, it will be the right way, in front of your aunt, on my knees, with a ring. Everything you deserve. Isabel held his hand before he could release it. Dominic, I need to tell you something. He stopped, concerned. What? She took a deep breath. When I discovered those signatures in the archives, when I thought your father had destroyed mine, I came to you expecting you to deny it, to defend your name above all. She paused, her eyes gleaming. But you didn't do that. You said you'd expose everything, lose the title, the fortune, everything. Even thinking your father was guilty, even knowing it would destroy you. Her voice failed. That was the moment I knew that you were different from any man I'd ever met, that you would choose what's right over what's easy, always. Dominic closed his eyes, squeezing her hand. I would have done it, he said quietly. If my father were truly guilty, I would have given up everything, because living with lies isn't living. I know. Isabel held his face, forcing him to look at her. And that's why I love you. Not for the title, not for the position, but because you have more honor in your little finger than most have in their entire body. From the kitchen, they heard an emotional sniffle. Both laughed, realizing Aunt Margaret was listening and crying. Your aunt approves of us, Dominic whispered. Completely. Isabel agreed. He held her hand once more. I can hardly wait, she whispered, and when he left, Aunt Margaret appeared with tea and red eyes. That, my dear, is a real man, she said, wiping her tears. Your father would have been proud. Isabel smiled, looking through the window as Dominic walked away. I know, and that's why I'm going to marry him. Epilogue. Viscountess Carstairs. London, 1826. 2 years later. The library at the Carstairs residence in Belgravia was different from the small secret house in Mayfair. Larger, more elegant, with windows overlooking the garden where roses bloomed. But it had the same desk covered with codes, the same smell of ink and paper, the same concentrated silence. Isabel, now Viscountess Carstairs, leaned over an intercepted letter, her pen gliding quickly across the paper. This one changes every 9 characters, she murmured. No, wait, every 8. Let me see. Dominic approached from behind, his hands resting on her shoulders. She smiled without raising her eyes. Viscount, you're distracting me. Viscountess, that's my intention. He kissed the top of her head. You work too much, says the man who spent all night at the ministry. Touché. They work together now. In secret, as it had always been. Only the Duke knew, and a few at the ministry who needed to know. To London, Isabel was merely Viscountess Carstairs, the daughter of Thomas Fairmont, whose name had been restored. The wife of the man who helped expose Sir Edmund Graves. Respectable, discreet, perfectly ordinary. No one suspected that at night she deciphered correspondence that changed the course of wars. And that was exactly how it needed to be. Finished, Isabel announced, pushing the deciphered paper forward. French troop movements, nothing urgent, but the Duke will want to see it. Dominic picked up the translation, read quickly. Brilliant, as always. He tucked the document in his coat. But now enough work. Aunt Margaret is waiting for us for tea. Isabel smiled. Her aunt visited weekly, always bringing her famous ginger biscuits and embarrassing stories about Thomas Fairmont as a child. She said she has news, Dominic added, helping her stand. What kind of news? I don't know, but she was smiling too much. He intertwined his fingers with hers as they walked. I think she's found a suitor. Isabel laughed. At 60? Good for her. They stopped at the library door, looking back at the desk, silent witness to so many nights working side by side. You know what's funny? Isabel said. 2 years ago, I invaded a forbidden library looking for an atlas, and I found you. And I was looking for a cryptographer. Dominic pulled her closer. And I found my entire life. She kissed him, soft and deep. The kind of kiss that came from certainty, not urgency. From the knowledge they would have thousands more. Happy? He asked when they separated. More than I imagined possible, she replied. And you? Complete. Dominic held her face between his hands. For the first time in my life, complete. From the parlor, Aunt Margaret's animated voice called to them. Viscountess! Viscount! The tea will get cold! They laughed, walking hand in hand. And there, between deciphered codes and futures yet to be written, two hearts that nearly lost themselves in darkness found their light. Not in revealed secrets, not in restored names, but in something much simpler. They had chosen each other and would choose again. Every day. Forever.